Starting in DataView 3.50, the DataView PEL Control Panel lets you create a single configuration to run simultaneous recording sessions on multiple instruments. This gives you the option to run the same recording session configuration on some or all instruments in your PEL network. In previous versions of DataView, recording sessions could only be configured for each instrument separately. To configure a multi-instrument recording session, ensure that each PEL on which you want the recording to run is actively connected to the computer. Check the instrument's name in the PEL network and make sure it has a green check mark next to it. Connect any disconnected instruments by highlighting its name and selecting Instrument, Reconnect Instrument. Then select the PEL network to display a list of PEL instruments in the data frame. Select each instrument on which you want to run a recording session. To select all listed instruments, click the checkbox in the top left corner of the list. Click the Configure button at the top of the data frame. The program checks to determine whether or not a recording session is running on or scheduled for a selected instrument. If so, a pop-up box appears asking whether or not to cancel the recording on that instrument. If you select No, the instrument will be excluded from the new recording session. The recording dialog box appears. The settings entered into this dialog box will apply to all instruments on which the recording will run. Session name lets you name the recording session. This name will then be part of the session's data. Names can be up to 40 characters long. You can include the session number in the name string by selecting the Increment checkbox. The session number uses 5 characters, so when it is included, you can enter up to 35 characters into the session name field. Recording period defines the time over which the data is to be recorded. To start a recording session immediately, select Record Now and use the Duration drop-down list to choose how long you want the session to run. The Duration field lets you select a predefined length for a recording, or indicate that it will run until manually stopped. To schedule a recording, click the Schedule Recording checkbox. Then use Start Date and Start Time to define when the recording starts, and End Date and End Time to specify when the recording stops. Alternately, you can define the end of the session through the Duration field. To reset the starting time for a scheduled recording, click the Reset Start Date Time button. This sets the start of the session to the current date and time, and the end of the session to the current date and time plus whatever value is entered in the Duration field. Aggregation period specifies the demand interval over which the instrument performs measurement aggregation. The Aggregation period drop-down field lists the available demand intervals. Recording options consist of a number of checkbox fields. Record aggregated trend for currents, voltages, power is an information-only field that indicates the instrument always records aggregated trend data for these values. Record individual aggregated harmonics to the 50th for current and voltage determines whether or not individual aggregated harmonics data will be included in the recording. This feature is not supported by the PEL 102 or 103, so if only these models are selected, this option is grayed out. Record 1-second trend for current, voltage, energy, power factor, THD specifies whether or not to record individual single-second measurements from which the aggregated data is generated. 1-second trend measurements consume a considerable amount of SD card memory and increase the time required to download recordings from the instrument. If 1-second measurements are not needed, you can improve system performance by unchecking this option. Record individual 1-second harmonics to the 50th for current and voltage determines whether or not to record 1-second current and voltage harmonic measurements made by the instrument. Harmonic measurements also consume a considerable amount of memory, so we recommend leaving this option unchecked if these measurements are not required. Note that this field is only active if the Record 1-second trend field is selected. Record 200 millisecond trends for current, voltage, power selects whether or not to record 200 millisecond measurements from which the aggregated data is generated. As with 1-second trend measurements, 200 millisecond measurements consume a considerable amount of memory. This feature is not supported by the PEL 102 or 103. Note that you cannot record individual 1-second harmonics and 200 millisecond trends at the same time. If you check one option, the other will be automatically unchecked. At the bottom of the Recording tab is a field listing the instruments on which this recording will run. If this includes PEL 105 instruments along with earlier models, this field lists any selected feature not supported by the PEL 102 or 103. The recording will run on these instruments, but the unsupported data will not be included. After you complete all recording dialog box fields, click OK to save the configuration. Identical recording sessions will run simultaneously on all selected instruments, either immediately or at the scheduled start time, depending on the selected settings. This concludes our quick explanation for how to create a multi-instrument recording configuration for Model PEL instruments. For more information about this and all other PEL control panel features, consult the help system that comes with the software. And be sure to check our YouTube channel for instructional videos about other topics in electronics, including the many products offered by AEMC.